Hi, I'm Misha Ketchell, editor of The Conversation. For democracy to work, people need to be well informed. That's why we work with academic experts to share their research and explain issues in the news. Everything we do is free to republish, but we need your support. Please donate to The Conversation by going to donate.theconversation.com or following the link in the show notes.
From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
The by-election in Farrer, the seat vacated by former Liberal leader Sussan Ley, will be held on May 9. The seat presents challenges for the coalition and also for One Nation. It's the first test of new Liberal leader Angus Taylor and also new Nationals leader Matt Canavan, who's just been chosen to replace David Littleproud. One Nation has been performing very well in general polls, but Farrer will test the extent in the federal scene it can translate into votes on the ground. We took the podcast to the electorate to get an early feel for the campaign. Labor isn't running in the seat and preferences will be very important. At present, the frontrunners appear to be a high-profile independent and the One Nation candidate. We spent our time in Albury, which is the main centre in the electorate. And we start our coverage with Anthony Bunn, who's a senior journalist with the Border Mail and has been covering the campaign. Anthony Bunn, can you start by telling us something about this electorate and what the issues are in this campaign?
It's a big electorate. It spreads from Albury right along to Wentworth in the west and then up to Griffith. So it covers a huge area. The issues probably reflect the different feelings there are in the electorate about the population of Albury being the biggest. The big issue in Albury is the hospital. There's been a promise for a upgraded hospital in Albury, but people want to see a new hospital and feel that they've been shortchanged by the governments. Had hope for some Commonwealth intervention to sort of assist them in the campaign to get a greenfield hospital. And then further afield, it's sort of primarily a lot more agriculture, and the big issue has been water there and how it's integrated into the community in relation to water and the environment and the trade-offs that there are with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan.
What proportion of voters are in Albury, roughly?
Roughly about 40%. So in theory, you could just about get a majority if you got all of Albury, but you'll still need some of those outlying areas. And Michelle Millthorpe, the independent, did get all the Albury booths last time. So if that's repeated, then she's sort of got a firm base, I guess, to go upon if she can do that again.
So, of course, she was pipped by Sussan Ley, a member who's retired and created this by-election. What did the electorate at the end think of Sussan Ley?
I think they were probably sympathetic to her plight in terms of being the Liberal leader and being the first female leader and sort of ending up being rolled in that fashion. But I also think there's probably a sort of a little bit of frustration that after 25 years, there's a sentiment that what have we got from her being in Parliament? She was the Environment Minister. She was the Health Minister. So she sort of interestingly covers both those portfolios that are sort of the key pivot points, you could say.
Now, of course, this is a four-cornered contest now in terms of the big players, the Nationals, the Liberals, One Nation, and as you've mentioned, the independent Michelle Millthorpe. What do you see as the challenges for each of these candidates? Firstly, the two coalition candidates, of course, competing against each other.
Yeah, well, the challenge there, I guess, is sort of the blowback that they may receive from all the ructions that have been going on with the Liberal and the National parties in recent times, and we've seen it even this week with the change in leader of the Nationals. And how they deal with that, and also, I guess, how they carve out an identity for themselves, because it's been 25 years since the Nationals have run a candidate in Farrer with the coalition agreement, so they have to sort of reintroduce themselves in a way to the electorate. and then the Liberal candidate will have to sort of pick up the slack from Sussan Ley and fill her boots, which are going to be hard to fill after 25 years in Parliament.
And of course, we've got two new leaders, Matt Canavan, who's been just chosen, and Angus Taylor, who was chosen not very long ago. So it is quite a big contest for the leaders, isn't it?
It is, and it's sort of a bit of a test for them, particularly, I guess, how they've received in the communities that they go out to. I guess that old saying about being a good retail politician, that's sort of going to be tested out for the first time for them on the ground here in Farrer and sort of meeting and greeting people across the electorate.
And just going to the other two main candidates, you've got One Nation, who now seems to be picking up a lot of support in the area, and of course the Independent, who's running second time round. What are their challenges and prospects, do you think?
I guess they've got to sort of set out where they stand in relation to what they could achieve, because unlike the Liberal and National candidates, they're not from a major party, so they've got to demonstrate what they may achieve. And the interesting thing in the Independents case is that across the river in the northeast of Victoria, we've got an Independent in Helen Haynes. So I guess there's people, particularly in Albury and this end of the electorate, that have sort of witnessed that. So we've got a bit of an example of that locally, but it's going to be convincing a lot of others. And there's also the perception that she's a so-called teal.
Is that a problem?
Well, it depends through whose eyes you look at, because certainly she's being promoted as a teal in One Nation circles and other circles. So it's sort of something that she'd be wanting to differentiate herself from, because obviously there are a lot of metropolitan issues that teals represent that don't resonate here and don't have the same impact here. So that is something that she'll have to sort of deal with, particularly, as I say, on social media in that area where there's a lot of claims being made by people along that line. In terms of the One Nation candidate, I guess the big thing for him is sort of convincing people in Albury about himself. He's obviously growing up in the Narandra area. He's got connections in that part of the electorate. He's not well known down here, but I guess he's got the advantage of the One Nation party behind him. And certainly in recent times, a lot of people, if you've asked them who they're going to vote for, they haven't hesitated in saying One Nation. So there seems to be a willingness amongst the One Nation supporters to be vocal about who they're supporting.
He's also an ex-national, so he sort of is a bit of a symbol for the move of voters from the Nationals to One Nation.
Yes, yeah, his personal story, I guess, reflects that, and that's where there's going to be interesting to see what sort of crossover there is, because I guess the interesting thing with the Nationals candidate, though, Brad Robinson, is that he's from Albury, so he's from this end of the electorate as opposed to the rural end of the electorate. So he may have been chosen with that in mind in terms of getting some of the Albury vote, but at the same time, he's got the rural vote on the other flank that he's going to be keenly seeking to attract as well.
Just going back to Michelle Millthorpe, the Independent, for a moment, is she tealish in the sense that we see the teals in the big cities, or is she just being labelled a teal because she got money from the Homes of Court fund?
Well, yeah, she would say it's purely because of the Homes of Court fund in relation to Climate 200. When I asked her about that the other week, she sort of described it as a GoFundMe page. It's people making...
I need the money.
Yeah, it's people making contributions that way. She says that she's, the money comes from all sorts of people. It doesn't just come from him. So she was trying to distance herself from that perception that she's a puppet of Simon Homes of Court, as would be portrayed by her rivals.
Now, water is obviously, as you say, a big issue. Can you just explain for our listeners in simple terms, what is the issue with water?
I guess it's all about its usage at the end of the day and where it goes to, because there's water that's being allocated to the environment under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. And the concern is, well, is there enough water still being going into irrigation? How is that supporting the irrigation? And then you've got the food bowl concept on top of that, that these are the people that are meant to be feeding us. If they don't get enough water, how can the nation be fed? So fundamentally, it's environment versus industry in a way.
And of course, we're now suddenly all talking about fuel. How much is that a problem at the moment in this electorate? Have you been able to fill up your car without any difficulty? And do you think that that will be an issue in this by-election?
Personally, I haven't had a problem, but I think it could be an issue. I think the Nationals candidate himself struggled to find two places to fill up the other night when he was leaving from Albury to go to Canberra, and had to go to a third station to find diesel. So I guess that's emblematic that it's not only some of the outlying areas that are affected by that, but I guess it's certainly the price is going to be the issue. In terms of access to it, I guess it's going to be a matter of what happens with the government's policy in saying that they're going to be releasing reserves and so on. So you've got two issues there, but certainly the price feeds into that cost of living issue, which is going to be a pinch point for a lot of people's votes, I'd imagine.
Anthony, thanks very much for those insights.
Thanks for having me.
We also caught up with Matt Canavan, who 2 days after being chosen as the new Nationals leader was campaigning in the electorate. Matt Canavan, it's been quite a week for you. David Littleproud resigned. You became leader a day later. Now you're in Farrer campaigning for your candidate, Brad Robertson. What sort of reception have you received this morning in the electorate?
Look, it's been really positive. Michelle, I've got enormous amounts of energy. I'm young, I'm keen, I love this country. And I think there's nothing that afflicts us that we can't fix ourselves. So, look, we've had a great morning with Brad. Don't want to blow my own trumpet or anything, but people were coming up and saying, well done, rah, rah, rah. And it's always nice to have that reaction. I do find, though, Michelle, the people that hate you don't tend to come up and say, I can't stand your guts. They do online. Online, they do that, but not in real life. So it's lovely to be out here on the streets of Albury with lots of positivity. And Brad's done an excellent job at getting me across the issues, particularly health. That's the big issue here.
So what have people spoken to you about this morning?
Well, yeah, the number one issue on people's lips is the health services here in Albury and Wodonga. This is, I suppose, one city, really, one community crossing a border, and that makes things complex. But they don't have the size of hospital that other similar towns have, or indeed even smaller towns in the region. And maybe that is partly because of the border, and it's difficult then to work out which state government has to pay for it all. But people deserve to have proper health services, and I heard some harrowing stories just now from doctors and community members in this area. So my commitment is to go back and fight for them. They've got some pretty detailed plans. Brad's spent the last few years developing detailed plans for a new hospital. That's going to be expensive, but hey, that's my job, and I'll go away and do my best.
That's mainly a state issue, of course.
It is, but federal governments fund these things all the time, and given its cross-border nature, there's an element here that needs an unlocking aspect to it. And look, I come back to the point that our future as a country is in regional Australia. If we want to make sure that we either provide affordable housing to young people, or that we don't turn our country into Singapore and lose our way of life, we have to build houses with backyards in country areas. And if you don't have adequate health services, people aren't going to come out to country areas. They will continue to add to the demand in the major cities, and that will mean a lot of young Australians miss out. And I don't want to see that. I want to create opportunities out here in lovely places like Albury for young people who are happy to move, happy to perhaps go somewhere else, to have that opportunity, and that will free up a house for those who want to stay in Sydney and Melbourne as well.
Now, the Nationals would be well down in the stakes with the betting market in this by-election. What do you rate their chances as?
I think we're going to win. I've been just blown away by Brad here today. I hadn't met Brad until this week. I actually had a press conference scheduled for Brad on Wednesday, well before I knew I'd even be running for leader. Brad was going to come up to Canberra and help promote a bill we were introducing to protect prime agricultural land from these large-scale wind and solar factories. But he already had the go to get in a car, come up to Canberra from here, and then, as I said earlier, I've met him today, and he's already developed these massive plans for a hospital. He hasn't been a candidate. He's been the chair of the local Nationals branch, so he's done that as a Nationals Party member for his community. Brad has a 29-year history in the Australian military, leading our troops in difficult situations. He's obviously a leader, and we need leaders in Canberra. So I reckon we're going to win.
Now, health is very important in Albury, but water is key in many parts of this electorate, which is vast. What is the problem with water, and what should the federal government be doing now about it?
Look, number one, there can't be any more buybacks. There's been too much water taken out of rural communities. I cut my political teeth here in this area on the Murray-Darling issue. I was the Chief of Staff to Barnaby Joyce, who was the Shadow Water Minister at the time. I wrote the policy to introduce a 1,500 gigalitre water buyback cap, and that should have been adhered to. It was working well under the former coalition government, but Labor has come in and ripped that up, changed that legislation, and they're now ripping out the heart of a lot of irrigation communities by taking more water away from productive measures. What would be much better is that we invest in engineering solutions that especially increase the efficiency of environmental water delivery. It's ridiculous that we require our farmers to be more efficient every year. They're the most efficient industry in our country. Even with that productivity slowdown, farming continues to be a productivity performer. But the delivery of water to environmental assets wastes so much, and there's not the same obligation imposed on the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder. So we should get any additional water savings from investing in those measures, not taking out the heart of rural communities.
Now, you mentioned before renewable projects. You're very hardline on climate issues, but you embrace coal with massive enthusiasm. Do you think that's going to be a problem in terms of your relations within the coalition, where they do need to win seats, where people are engaged positively with the climate cause?
Well, look, I'll let others categorise me the way they would like to. You said I'm enthusiastic. I'm just enthusiastic for our country. And coal is our second biggest export. It's a wonderful Australian industry. It employs thousands and thousands of people. It is also the heart of many communities that near to where I live. And so I love this country. I love Australia. I love Australian coal. I also do love Australian solar and wind projects as well, where they're appropriate. The problem with the renewable energy rollout is we are just having too much of a good thing. We don't need any or much more large-scale solar plants in most parts of the country now, because the power price is often negative at that time of day when the sun's up. So why would you build more projects when the market price, the price is telling you it's not needed? That's when you get a negative price, it's saying you've got too much of it. And that's not going to lower prices, because all that does is create more shortages when we don't have sun. We're seeing that now with massive increases in electricity prices. And so this is just not working. Look, Michelle, I am just interested in things that work. I don't care about the ideology or what people want to label me. I just want an energy system that works for Australians. It's not working now. That is very, very clear. No one can convince me that the current approach is the right one. We now, the Liberal National Party, have a different approach where we go back to using all of our resources, including our coal that we're seemingly, even the Labor Party, seemingly happy to export to the rest of the world. We use that. We use our gas. We use renewables where they're appropriate. We just have the best fit of energy technologies for the demands that we need in a modern complex economy. It's just like a balanced diet. We just had some lunch here. I probably would have just preferred to have a steak, but you shouldn't have red meat in every meal. I'm actually not eating. Did I just eat meat? I'm not meant to eat meat on Lent. On Friday, I might have breached. I'll have to go seek forgiveness. Luckily, that's allowed in the Catholic Church. But I'm trying not to do that. But you should have a balanced diet.
You sound like Tony Abbott.
You should have a balanced diet. And so there's a role for solar and wind in certain applications, but there is also a role for having always on affordable power like coal for our industry, to keep manufacturing here, to keep fuel refining here. And there's a role for nuclear long-term too, especially as we would like to keep cybersecurity and AI data centres, because they have enormous power demands that nuclear can serve, as we're seeing in the United States.
Now, this by-election is going to be a big test for One Nation, and I guess also it's a nice contest between you and Barnaby Joyce in your battle. What do you say to many people in this electorate who seem inclined to defect from a coalition vote previously to a One Nation vote? Why shouldn't they do that to send a message as a protest to the coalition or to Canberra more generally?
Well, I think people like Brad and the Nationalist Party will get more done. We'll get things done. That's how we approach things. And that's why Brad's got this extremely well-developed plan for health services here in this region. So we're a get things done party. And I think it's about time we have leaders in Canberra that are focused on getting things done. In saying that, I would ask people just to keep an open mind in the next 8 weeks. I understand why people have been frustrated with our political movement. I have been very frustrated with my Liberal and National Party movement, which I love, but like lots of things you love, you get frustrated with them at times. And we did lose our way in the last few years. We were perhaps chasing short-term political gains at the long-term cost of focusing on what's important for Australia. But I'm very confident now with the elevation of Angus Taylor and myself that we are back. We are back to backing our principles and values and fighting hard for those. That will mean that we'll take a disciplined approach to spending, as Angus is outlining today. It's what we need to get inflation and interest rates down. We will have a focus on developing our nation and our country areas like here. And as I said earlier this week, we need more babies. We need to support families. We cannot continue to rely on the importation of people from overseas to artificially pump our economic statistics and to not keep our Australian way of life long term.
You and Barnaby have exchanged a few verbal shots in the last few days. Do you think you'll be having a steak with him anytime soon?
I spoke to him this morning. Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm mates with him.
Why were you talking to him this morning?
I just said g'day. I don't have to tell you, Michelle, what I spoke to him about, but
Old habit.
this morning. How was your sleep? What's the weather like in Danglemar? But no, I look, he's on a different football team now, right? And so,
Well, I guess a beer
none of this
after
is
the
personal.
match.
None of it's personal. It is serious though, because it's the future of our country. So I'm not going to pull my punches. I will defend our own political movement. I'll defend why I think Brad Robertson is the best candidate here for Farah. And I'll point out why I think a vote for One Nation is not going to deliver the results for the area. But I do have a lot of respect for Pauline. She's got incredible resilience and longevity. Barnaby will go down as one of the best Nationals leaders in our history. It's just very sad and a shame, I think, what's happened. But I don't agree with his choice. But that doesn't mean we can't be mates and share a beer. It just means I'm probably going to tackle him harder because he is a mate.
No, you've said why people shouldn't vote for One Nation. Essentially, your argument is One Nation can't deliver and the coalition can't at the moment, but potentially can. But why shouldn't they here vote for the Liberal? Why should they vote National?
I do believe the Nationals Party are the best party to represent these types of towns because it's in our DNA. It's what we do. I do think that a independent voice for smaller towns is very, very effective up there in Canberra. And so with a Nationals Party voice within our room, I just think you get a bit more leverage, a bit more bang for your buck. By being in the Nationals Party, and we've had a good record of delivering for rural communities, I believe, in our time in government. And keeping in mind, I with Barnaby when he was Deputy Prime Minister, helped build the first dam for agricultural production in Queensland in a generation at Rookwood Weir. That's up and running. 800,000 macadamia trees are now growing thanks to that water capture. So we do deliver those results. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that I will be strongly recommending a number one for Brad Robertson, but number two will be the Liberal candidate. That's the second best choice.
And where will your preferences go in relation?
Well, that's something a party will consider and work out with other parties. We don't know what all the other candidates will be. But what I would say is that I'll always like our preferences to go to other candidates in the order that we think that is best for the country.
What does that mean in terms of One Nation?
In this seat in particular, the inner city funded candidate is not a good choice for our region.
That's the independent you're talking about.
Well, she'll tag herself as an independent, but she's funded by the inner city. She's supported by the inner city. And I don't think she's going to ultimately have the best interests of Albury, of farming communities that rely so heavily on those water rights I mentioned. Those people want to take away the economic basis of those rural communities. Those areas of the country do not support irrigated farming, do not support our mining industry, do not support the things that make regional Australia tick. So I do not think regional Australia is well served by inner city funded candidates. So look, we'll work out once all the candidates are listed which order they go in, but my my preferences are pretty clear.
Just finally, fuel is obviously the issue of the moment in light of the war in the Middle East and shortages, especially in regional Australia. What more should the government be doing about this? We've seen some measures being announced this week, but what extra do you think the government needs to do?
I think they have to have a serious look at the powers they have. Under the Petroleum Act, they can direct flows to particular areas. I know that's a very serious act. Bridget McKenzie and Dan Tehan did write to the minister earlier this week, asking Chris Bowen to consider that. We do have this critical situation where farmers may not be able to put in crops. Some farmers are concerned about having to potentially put down livestock if they do not have the fuel to continue food delivery to their animals. So this is extremely serious. This is the most serious issue that has faced our country since COVID. And in COVID, we took some pretty quick and draconian measures to protect the safety of Australians. I haven't seen the government act with the same kind of speed and determination this week so far. But the powers are there. The powers are there in these critical circumstances for the minister to use. And I think in those critical situations, what we need to do is get the fuel from point A to point B to save people's businesses, to save their livelihoods, and perhaps save these animals' lives as well. It's a tragic situation. So the government keeps saying there's enough supply. There's enough supply. They've said all week there's no supply issue. The boats have arrived. The petrol and diesel is here in the country. But there is a supply issue here. It has been this week. Brad couldn't fill up earlier this week. We had to go around to lots of service stations to do it. There clearly is a supply issue for farmers. So that is a supply issue, and get that fuel to where it's needed.
You're saying that some restrictions should be put on city motors?
No, that's not what I'm saying. My understanding of what's happening here is that the large fuel companies are hoarding the supplies, like the supplies here in the country. They're hoarding it. Now, the reasons for why that's happening, I don't exactly know, but I suppose if I could speculate, they might be concerned about future supplies, and they're holding some back for their own distribution channels rather than sell it to the independent fuel suppliers that typically service regional communities and farmers. And that's why we're having this impact. And so, look, I do understand this is a very serious issue, and I'm not saying the government can solve every supply issue here through its own powers, but there clearly are some critical needs that may need to be elevated right now to ensure there's not a lot of damage done.
Matt Canavan, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you.
We also talk on the podcast with One Nation's David Farley, an agri-businessman. David Farley, you were once a member of the Nationals. Can you tell us why you've changed from One Nation? When did that happen? What's the story there?
When I returned from Queensland back to the Riverina, I joined the Nationals. And I was very keen to use my skills and experience of life in helping Nationals develop policy and then ultimately prosecute policy into legislation. I found engagement with the Nationals difficult. I was bringing policy and contest on policy to them, or it was totally being ignored. I was driving 4 and 5 hours to attend meetings that would last 20 minutes and having to return again. I found nepotism inside the Nationals, especially the Farrer branch in particular, very challenging. And it actually started to weigh on the democratic rights of trying to run the branch.
So are you finding that a lot of people in this electorate are moving to One Nation?
There's a lot of people who are completely disenfranchised with the democracy at the moment, and more so with the coalition. There's been 25 years of coalition rule over Farrer. And at one point recently, not only did we have Sussan Ley was the environmental minister, but also Perrin Davey was the water minister for the National Party as a senator. And we had no action, no response at all in regard to prosecuting the debates that were coming up from grassroots that had to be debated in the parliament. There was no results, no effect at all. So we all got very disillusioned quite quickly. It's carried through, and the polls can actually tell you how that disillusion is measured in quantity today.
One issue that's very big with One Nation is obviously immigration. It's been quite aggressive in that area. And yet in regional areas like Farrer, farmers depend on immigrants to help with their farm labour, and many towns need immigrants. So What's your position on immigration and what are you hearing from your voters?
Immigration for Farah in particular, that's what we founded Farah on post the First World War, into the Second World War, and even today. Immigration plays a critical and vital role, not only in agriculture being where we farm the crops and grow the crops, but in agribusiness, where we process the crops, whether it be a winery, whether it be a flour mill or an abattoir, etc. And then you come over to our community services in health, aged care, hospitals. Again, immigration plays a big role. One Nation's broader picture is we want good policy and good immigration. And at the moment, when you look at immigration and how it's being applied, how it's being bid for, and how many people are literally getting commissions off how we're bringing immigrants into the country, we're not managing immigration properly, both in the quantity of people, the quality of people, and to meet the demand for what our industries are calling for. So immigration is the call from One Nation is for better quality immigration management from the Australian government to give the style of immigrant that we need, both with skills and ability to assimilate into our country.
But also, One Nation says we need many fewer immigrants. Do you agree with that point
Well,
of view?
I hear that from both sides of politics. No one really knows how many we need because at the moment we're floundering around without direction. If we had direction, we would have policy developed that was going on a big nation-building plan. We are no longer nation-building. And I apply that to the debate around water. Water at the moment is looked at through the lens as being an environmental asset, as opposed to a smart, modern, developed Western world would look at water as being a sovereign asset. And a sovereign asset then becomes part of your responsibility of security of food, the affordability of food, and ultimately water becomes part of your national defence. So at the moment, when we look at agriculture in particular, we're being, as water is being extracted from the pool, not growing the pool, we ultimately will need less immigrants. But if we adopted a policy instead of a contractions policy, because that's what water's doing at the moment, it's contracting regional Australia. If we adopted, instead of a debt-funded extraction policy, we adopted an investment policy in new dams, new water, etc., then that would tell us how many immigrants we need. So when I look at immigration today, it's very difficult to say, do we need 100,000, 150,000 or 200,000? So what we've got to be able to do is take ownership of the direction and the aspiration of Australia. Government needs to be able to come up with at least a growth plan that incorporates not only population, because population is a follower of what is Australia going to look like. What capacities and capabilities do we want out of regional Australia? From not only agriculture, but from agribusiness processing. What do we want from engineering? What do we want from education? And at the moment, there is no real clear direction that can set policy, not only for immigration, for water, for education, for internal affairs. It's rudderless at the moment.
Just on immigration, your leader, Pauline Hanson, made some very provocative comments about Muslims, questioning whether there were good Muslims. Now, I think that even Barnaby Joyce distanced himself from those comments. What's your feeling about them?
One thing that was quickly demonstrated as to the travesty of Bondi was there are good Muslims. We saw a good Muslim go in and defend Australians. They may have been Jewish Australians, but there are other Australians in there, and that demonstrated that, yes, there are good Muslims.
So in that case, you are still associated with a leader who has suggested that there are not good Muslims.
Well, it's interesting. I've met Pauline Hanson and I spent last weekend in her company, and we debated a lot of issues.
That one too?
We debated immigration in particular because I'm trying to win the seat of Farah, which has historically grown on immigration. And we've virtually come to the agreement that what we need is quality policy on immigration that matches the demands and the aspirations of all Australians. So,
did you disagree on much?
What we finally agreed on, and even though we were disagreeing on a number of problems, but Pauline's ultimate resolve is it good for Australia? Is it good for Australians? And if the answer was yes, then it was let's do it.
Now, you come from Narrandera, and yet Albury has the biggest slab of population in this electorate. Do you think you're disadvantaged by not being from Albury?
No, I don't think there's a disadvantage, but there's also a respect of what Albury is. Albury, Farrer, as I alluded to earlier, is an agricultural powerhouse, and which grows crops, raises sheep and cattle. Then we've got agribusiness, which processes them. And if you look at the employment base, then the employment base is larger in agribusiness than agriculture. Then you look at the community servicing of education, health, law, audit, engineering, etc. That is a bigger service base. And what Albury is a big service community of professional skills that supports and underwrites agribusiness and agriculture. Now, that service community wouldn't be here unless agriculture and agribusiness were there. Likewise, if we didn't have a good service business to be able to service that all, agriculture wouldn't be there. So I look at where we sit today in 2026. We've got great technology. Our logistics are good to drive around. Our technology with Starlink in the cars now, I can be talking to people. But I do think the most important thing is mobility. But there's one critical thing in this campaign we must remember. This campaign is about the federal seat of Farrer. And if you look at what a federal seat is there to do, it is to develop policy and ultimately put that policy into legislation, which is the architecture of the direction of Australia. And then from there, you pass it down to the states to execute it, and then ultimately through to the regional governments. And what we want to be careful of is that as we all campaign for this, the constituent wants to be very clear of what is the role of a federal member for Farrer in Canberra. And it's really about understanding the architecture and the design of the policies and legislation we've got at a domestic level and an international level that all have an impact on Farrer.
But despite your disillusionment with the Nationals, couldn't one argue that as a Nationals member, if you got into Parliament, you could do that better than as a One Nation member?
Well, in my due diligence when I was making my choice of how to represent Farrer, I sat back and went through my National Party experience. I sat back and watched the performance, because I was actively engaged with Sussan Ley, as I was equally so with the independent member of Murray at a state level and the Cootamundra National, Stephanie Cook, at a state level. And what I was really disillusioned was that, again, people weren't visionary, lacked, in my view, international experience and gravitas to bring other ideas to the table. But what I was looking for was political courage and political tenacity. And one thing that I found in spades above all was that the One Nation party and team had political courage and political tenacity to do what's right for Farrer. They are not a party of compromise because they don't have to compromise themselves with one party to the other party. They haven't got a strong relationship with the Greens or the unions. They're there to execute their policies on behalf of the constituents. So then I looked at the other side of it and said, I need machinery if I get into Canberra. And when I refer to machinery, I need the party I'm with to have a presence. Now, we already know that there's one member on the lower floor, ultimately will be Barnaby Joyce, and then you'd go to the Senate, and there's 5 or 6 that are populating in the Senate at the moment. There is machinery in Canberra with One Nation, and if you take the time window that's available, which is 26 to 28 until the next federal election, there's a lot of heavy lifting to do. There's a lot of issues that need to be brought to the lower house, debated across the lower house, that ultimately, if we're doing it in the benefit of Farrer, therefore we're doing it in the benefit of the nation, the other political parties should be able to engage in that discourse and help design the future of Farrer, which is the future of Australia.
What are your chances of winning?
I'm comfortable that I'm prosecuting a platform on my campaign that is at a level that's resonating with the constituents. I'm looking at what's important to their industry over time and how we can go about executing the strategies that I've outlined to them. Many of them are finding it incredibly refreshing because I'm bringing my experience and perspective from what I've seen globally to the table. I'm bringing my energy and experience. We are coming to the party late, if you compare it to the Independent, who continued campaigning post the last election. we're definitely in front of the Liberal Party because they're still yet to select their candidate. And as we saw from the news today, Matt Canavan has started the campaign in Albury already. And it's interesting how he started his campaign. He started his campaign on attack on One Nation, not on what it is that Farrer needs.
Anthony, thanks very much for that overview.
Thank you.
We also talk on the podcast with State Liberal MP for Albury, Justin Clancy, who is Deputy Leader of the State Opposition. Justin Clancy, the Liberals have held this seat for 25 years, and yet they're not the favourite at the moment, at the start of this campaign, to hold it. Why is that?
I think it'd be fair to say there's a confluence of events, isn't there? There's the broader play across the nation and the way the political discourse is at the moment. There is certainly impacts at the regional level there in that regard, and all of that I think is creates a moment where we find ourselves right here, right now, where certainly there is going to be a strong contest as Sussan Ley steps away. It will certainly be a strong contest.
There's a lot of disillusionment by people about the main political parties. To what extent have you found this?
On a personal level, I'm fortunate. I appreciate the opportunity to travel our community. It's a community that I've grown up in, and certainly have that connection, and I appreciate that. But more broadly, I think to your point, the regions in particular have faced significant change. Change has had a massive impact on the community over the last 10, 15 years, whether it be the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, whether it be the rollout of renewables. There's been change thrust on the community. And in that regard, my sense of it is that that's had its impact. There is a sense of concern, anxiety around some of that change. And that is, I think that's what we're experiencing right at the moment.
And do you think that level of change is causing people to turn to minor players, because we're seeing this surge in support for One Nation, and the main independent candidate in this by-election polled particularly well last time?
I think it does. I think we have a situation where, and again, not just in this community, Michelle, but more broadly, people are grappling with where things are right at this point in time. We are going through significant change, and we all know, if I come from a small business background, I understand how challenging change can be, and what I suppose, for want of a word, disconcerting it can be for people. And I'm reminded, and this is perhaps Michelle, one of the things that I think about at this point in time is a beautiful line from Eddie Jacku. We're talking about all this change, and I touch on Eddie because that reflects Bondi. And Eddie spoke of, don't walk in front of me, I may not follow. Don't walk behind me, I may not lead, but walk beside me. And I think right at this moment in time, significant change, disruption, whether it be COVID, whether it be AI, whether it be, as we've touched on, Murray-Darling Basin Plan, all of that being thrust on at the moment. And that change really, it has created a sense of being a disconcerting feeling, and a feeling often through that. I think an important part, Michelle, obviously, and you'd be picking up on this, is that sense of having your voice being heard. And that is something that is certainly loud and clear, or strongly coming through at the moment.
Do you think people are annoyed that they are facing a by-election in this seat at this time?
I think certainly the timing of it is challenging in that regard. I think that will be a factor, and certainly in that regard, it is at a time where it does have an impact. That's being candid. Obviously, new leadership, both for the Liberals and the Nationals only just the last few days, means that for the community, they haven't got a full sense of what leadership under Matt Canavan and Angus Taylor will look like. So no doubt that will have an impact. Again, it will be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 5 weeks, because certainly we're going to see, get an opportunity close up to see our political leaders, whether it be, One Nation, whether it be the Liberals or Nationals, we will be seeing them up close. It will be a good chance to see what the community makes of their style of leadership.
Was Sussan Ley popular? Some people suggested that perhaps she didn't tend the electorate so much in later times.
I think it's absolutely something we need to have a conversation with our community. When I look at it there, Michelle, and this is something we need to explore as a community, is when you have an elected representative to Canberra, yes, they are there to represent the community, and being connected to the community is an important part of it. But they are also there, they are elected to go to Canberra to deal with the affairs of state or affairs of nation, and that takes up time in itself. And I think I'll be candid, I see that as, and this reflects my political bias, but there's a little bit of a mythology around the independent as being the community representative. But that takes away from the role to be played as someone there for the affairs of the state, affairs of the nation.
Was there any angst about the way Sussan Ley was deposed, or that she was deposed?
There is a sense, and I'll go back one step. You touched on the favourability towards Sussan. Sussan has been a large part of our political leadership for 25 years. That is a significant level of time. And over that time, there may be those who have felt that there is time for change, and that is certainly, again, a message that gets pushed from certain quarters.
Well, including in your own branches, right?
There is certainly a feeling that is always going to be there whenever you've got someone of an extended period. But there is also a loyalty there as well. And so there are, again, being candid, there will be those who will feel that the manner of Sussan's departure will have an impact on how they feel. I think that is certainly an understandable feeling. But there is also that recognition that things weren't going well for the Liberal Party as it stood, and that something ultimately there needed to be a shift to be able to effectively create a reset. We went through that in the New South Wales State Party with Mark Speakman. Mark is someone that I have a high regard for, Michelle, but it was clear that where it stood with Mark's leadership, there needed to be a reset.
Will these coalition ructions, though, at a federal level, hamper you in this campaign?
There needs to be clearly demonstration by Liberals, certainly at the federal level, that the time for staring at the navel, the time to be talking about self is well past. That does not serve the party well. It does not serve the community well. We need to be absolutely focused on the needs of our community and the policies that we will be speaking about, our vision for the nation, how we can drive prosperity forward for our country.
I must say, in Canberra, they're always saying we mustn't talk about ourselves, and then you get another burst of talking about themselves.
Agreed. And
Pretty ingrained habit.
I can say we, as a state member, we'll chew our knuckle off at those times. That lesson can only be given so many times. That and my hope, and I think we're seeing signs of it. We will see. But that message needs to be clearly heeded.
Do you think that the Nationals running in this campaign help or hinder the Liberals?
It's a fair question to ask. I've given that consideration and thought, and I come from a farming family. It's fairly pragmatic. It is the way it is. I think that we need to make sure that between the Nationals and Liberals that we don't make it a hindrance.
Where do you think the Liberals should preference One Nation?
I respect, and I think Matt Canavan put it so well in terms of calling out the politics of One Nation. I am also conscious, though, that a lot of people who look to One Nation at the moment are looking there because we weren't heeding their voice as the Liberals and Nationals. So I'm grateful that smarter minds than I need to make that decision, Michelle.
But you must have a view.
I have a view that we have a very polarising situation in our community at the moment. from a teal on the left to One Nation in I suppose, a populist right. I'll call it a reactionary right. But for me, what's going to be important is that the Liberals and Nationals demonstrate that they are. My view is to the sensible centre right, and that is where we need to be aiming to be. I think it will be one of those real conversations to discern, but I am conscious of those people who currently see One Nation as the way to go, because they are a lot of people who would normally vote for the coalition who are not unreasonably disaffected with the way we've been over the last 12 months or so.
What have people been saying about Pauline Hanson's Muslim comment?
Certainly, and this is the, I suppose, the dissonance there. A lot of people will say, I know good people of a Muslim faith, they are my friends, but it's that dissociation then at the broader level. And that is the point that Matt Canavan rightly raises, that we need to call that out. Yes, there are those who are disaffected with the classic centre right. We need to attend to that. We need to make sure that we are speaking to them and making sure that their voices are being heard. But race politics is not the pathway to go down.
And in terms of the issues, just briefly, what issues will be most decisive in this result in May? Will it be health? Will it be water? Will it be leadership?
Two things I'd like to say. The first, Michelle, I'd like for your listeners, wherever they are across Australia, I want to see the recognition of the opportunities for regions. So you ask a fair question about the challenges and the issues, but we have a very positive story to be telling about living in regional communities. You know, with your background in the Riverina, it is a great story to tell. We need to get that out there. We need to be looking at, I'm a big believer, Michelle, that if we want to enable the full potential of Australia as a nation, we need to be turning to the regions and unlocking their full potential. To your question, the issues coming from regions, I'll distill it down to one word, and that is connectivity. That is connectivity to health, connectivity to education, connectivity when we talk about the physical transport, and digital connectivity. Those are generally the issues. And the final point I would make is how quickly our world changes. 2-3 weeks ago, we perhaps would have seemed far-fetched to suggest that fuel prices and escalating volatility in fuel prices and security around fuel would be the front and centre issue of the past 7 days. It is there now. It reflects that we are in a volatile world. And in that sense, my sense is around sensible leadership is what we need to help guide and walk with our community through this.
Justin Clancy, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you, Michelle.
And finally, we talk with high-profile independent Michelle Milthorpe, who ran at the last election and got about 1/5 of the primary vote. Michelle Milthorpe, this is your second time round, but this must be an incredibly different campaign from last time. Just tell us about that.
I think the fabulous thing about this campaign is that all eyes are finally on Farah. It's been really exciting to see that the national media are taking notice of some of the issues and concerns that we've got here, and that there's people genuinely interested in what's happening for the people of our electorate.
Are the lessons that you learnt last time that you're applying this time?
Look, I've got a bigger team helping with the admin and the day-to-day running of the campaign, which is really great. Last time it was a handful of people doing that and our beautiful volunteers. This time there's more help in that regard, but also trying really hard to make sure that I hit on more areas in the electorate that I couldn't do last time because I just didn't have the ability or time to get out there.
Which is a vast electorate, so I hope you're able to get enough fuel to get to all those places.
Oh, look, that's, one of the number one issues right now, isn't it? I watched it go up 30 cents just in a couple of days when I was out at Griffith the other day. So it's a huge concern for people here.
Now, I think I've heard you say that you used to be a Liberal voter. Why did you get disillusioned with the Liberals?
I was just listening to some of the things that were being said, and the focus didn't appear to be on good policy and good politics. It was more about personal attacks and pointing out the negative all the time. And even though that's what I'm doing right now, but the reality for me is I wasn't feeling represented, and I wasn't feeling like I could relate to the member who was, there for us, and it just turned me off.
That was Sussan Ley.
Yeah, that's it.
But you'd always voted for her or a Conservative person before?
Yeah, so my parents were sort of national voters. Dad was a bit of a swing voter, and I had been a swing voter early on, but I looked at Sussan Ley as a woman, and particularly a woman who was, talking about women's and children issues at stages in her career. So that appealed to me. And then it just didn't anymore.
So what are the main issues in this campaign that you're finding so far? What are people telling you that's important to them?
Yeah, well, the consistent issues have been around water and the ability for our agricultural communities to produce what they need to, and that obviously the flow-on effect in communities there. Here in Albury, it's hospital, but everywhere is healthcare, childcare and aged care. We've got some great towns doing great things. Leeton's got some fantastic things happening in that childcare space, but then we've got childcare deserts in other areas. So, it's really about that care in communities is a big concern.
You're a high school teacher. Is education much of an issue more broadly beyond childcare?
Look, having adequate staff and the supply of educators in some of our regional communities is difficult, and they sort of attribute that back to those issues of housing and childcare as well. Not being able to attract and retain staff is really difficult because of those two issues in regional communities.
So is there a housing shortage in Albury?
In Albury, it's not too bad, but the further you get out, the more you hear about the difficulties people are having in rentals and also in actually buying houses, and also having development so that they can build houses. Infrastructure is really hard to get in some of those regional communities where they're relying on their local government to make housing developments instead of having housing developers come in. So that's something that I'd certainly be pushing for, is looking at ways that we can get funding and grants for local government to have the infrastructure they need to build on in their towns.
Your various Conservative opponents will be strongly labelling you a teal candidate. They're already doing that. You reject that label. Why are you not a teal candidate? You did get money last time from Climate 200. You will get money this time from them.
Look, I think it's laughable to be called a teal candidate when you've grown up in the country, lived in the country your whole life. So it's just an easy and lazy rhetoric for them to say that, sparks concern for some people. The reality is, for any candidate, is you need money to run a good election and a fair election, so you can get in and call for the changes that are needed, like good water policy and, a royal commission into water, looking at our healthcare. So, given that, you need funding, I've taken funding from a crowdfunding source, Climate 200, $20,000 at this point. But
that's for this election?
Yeah, but all of my funding is coming in from people who are doing direct funding to my campaign. So, yeah, again, everyone requires funding. I'm not getting funding from Gina Reinhart, and I'm not getting funding from people who, can sway the vote in one way or another. So, I just need to keep running my race. I'm not a teal. I don't have anything in common with the teal people in terms of upbringing and the people that I would represent. So, yeah.
So you're not making climate one of your major issues?
Look, I think it's really important that we understand that our farmers need to be, and our regional communities need to be, looking after the environment, and they do, because that's where they get their money from. That's how they run their farms and produce the things that we need in our country. So, there doesn't need to be a conflict of one or the other. I'm talking about ensuring that we've got, a good balance in what we need. We can't rely solely on renewables because, the burden of renewables is mostly felt in regional communities. We need good balance there. So no, I'm not running on climate. I'm running on good policy. That means that people can do the things that they need to do in balance with everything around them.
Everyone's talking about the disillusionment in the community at the moment. How strongly is that coming through?
Oh, look, you can see it in every conversation that you have. So people feeling frustrated, unheard and unseen. And particularly in our more regional communities where, they're not able to do their job right now, and that is to produce food for our nation. They're really disappointed in what's, in a government that they don't feel understands their context and understands them. So they're looking for alternatives. With the fuel situation at the moment, is causing massive concern in our regional communities. I had, people talking to me the other day about not being able to sow crops. At the moment, they just don't have the fuel supply out there. So it's something that we need to be looking at.
Labor's not contesting this election, so how much will that help you? You got 20% of the primary vote last time and ended up the second in the two-candidate preferred behind Ley. Will you be able to boost your primary vote significantly, given that a lot of Labor voters will go to you?
Oh, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think it's so different now. I mean, I got 45% of One Nation and the right vote as well last time as preference. So it's not guaranteed, and the landscape feels very different this time than it did last time. What I'm hearing from people out there and voters out there is a disappointment that Labor didn't run because, with such a majority government, they're like, well, don't they care about us?
That's an interesting take on it because Labor, of course, would have no hope in this seat, so you wouldn't necessarily have expected them to run in a by-election.
No, that's right. But I can understand why people sort of think, oh, well, they didn't even give themselves a chance. So it's an interesting thing that a few people have mentioned across the electorate, particularly, in Griffith and even Leeton the other day, people saying, oh, I don't know why they didn't care enough to put a candidate up.
Preferences will be really important in this election, who you get preferences from, but potentially who you give preferences to. Where will you put One Nation on your ticket?
Well, as an independent candidate, I'm very reluctant to give preferences. It's just the way that I am. But given the importance of this election and this by-election for our area and our electorate, and the need to want to put, ensure that we're getting the Royal Commission into order and we're looking at healthcare, childcare, aged care, I'm open to having conversations. But, as I said, it's a reluctance of mine to do that in the first place.
Michelle Milthorpe, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming out. It's important.
And that's all from Farah. Thank you to my producer and driver, Ben Roper. We'll be back with another interview soon, but goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.
What are you going to have? Can I have 2 pieces of mullet, please, Pauline?
From a fish and chip shop in regional Queensland
We are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
to the heart of Australian politics, this is the unlikely story of the country's most controversial minor party.
Are you xenophobic? Please explain.
For 30 years, One Nation and Pauline Hanson have been ridiculed, dismissed and shut out. Now, no one's laughing.
One Nation continuing to surge in the polls.
Dramatic surge in support for One Nation.
I'm back.
This is The Making of One Nation from The Conversation, and you can search for it wherever you listen to podcasts.